Welcome back. Tonight we're going to take a look at the 1983 Triple Crown winner in David Brin's Startide Rising. So when this novel came out, it won the Hugo in 1984, as well as the Nebula and Locus Awards in 1983. And the year's 2489, and we're following the crew of this starship called Streaker. And Streaker is not manned by your typical human or alien being, but a bunch of dolphins, spacefaring dolphins. So this is the second novel in David Brin's Uplift series. And the whole concept of Uplift is basically you have this patriotic race who helps raise an intelligent animal to sentience, and that's what Earthlings have done with chimpanzees as well as dolphins now. So this is the first fully dolphin crewed starship because they have all these special abilities that makes them, very good spacefaring animals. We would have thought, right? So we're following along in the antics of this starship called Streaker. And what happens is that they stumble upon this derelict fleet of spaceships, something like 50,000 spaceships. So they go to investigate and they beam a message back to Earth to saying, hey, pretty interesting here, it's really unprecedented. That's because, and the main reason for that is there's this galactic library, right? That all these galactic beings share information, and there's really almost nothing new under the sun. If it's been discovered or if it's known about, it'll be somewhere embedded in this huge galactic library, right? So the fact that this derelict spaceships haven't been recorded in the library sort of makes the dolphin crew think, hey, this is a very significant find. What do we need to do? So they've been back to Earth, and Earth just simply sends back a message, go into hiding, right? So this sort of makes the dolphins freak out a bit, thinking, hang on, before this was significant, but this really takes the cake. And they try to go into hiding. But that message gets intercepted by all these different galactic races out there. And some of them are religious zealots, and some of them are crusaders. Some of them just hate Earthlings because they see them as wolflings, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So they've got now all these galactic races either trying to aid them or destroy them or get their whatever they found and take that away from them and take ownership of it. So we have all these galactic races trying to get to this dolphin crew. We find that the dolphin crew are under the immense pressure that they're on. I mean, they're getting bombarded and hit with all sorts of, weapons, psi weapons as well. So they're also under a lot of pressure. And it's probably the fact that they weren't quite ready for space travel, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more. So that some of the actual crew start to regress a bit into their wild sort of fundamental nature, right? So they start to get a bit weird. Some of those dolphin crews have also been experimented on, which makes them a little bit more aggressive and more subject to regression. So all this infighting happens between the dolphin crew, and they've also got some Earthlings there that's trying to support them and trying to help them get through all of this. And it's just a mesh of wonderful things that are happening and trying to keep it all together. And so they also find a cadaver, basically, and they believe it to be the dead remains of this race of progenitors. So what the galaxy building here, the world building suggests is that there was an initial race of, and they're called progenitors in the book, that seeded life and intelligence in all the different worlds, all parts of the galaxy, and helped raise the initial races to sentience. So there's a belief of these progenitors, but they've been missing for forever. No one really knows whatever happened to progenitors. It's not mentioned in the galactic libraries at all. And it appears that the Earthlings in this, dolphin crew may have stumbled on the remains of one of these progenitors, which sparks even more curiosity. Because like I said, the Earthlings are really not seen favorably on in this book, because they're regarded as wolflings. And basically, a wolfling race is a race that's come to sentience without any help from a patriarch, from a patron race, right? So typically what happens in this galaxy world building that David Brin has done, a race comes to sentience through a patron race who may sponsor them, help them and nurture them into sentience so they don't go rogue or wolfling, as they call the Earthlings. But Earthlings seems to be pretty rare, in the sense that they're the only ones we read of in the book that have come to sentience by their own. And that gives them some certain advantages when it comes to dealing with the different galactic races. So you have all this wonderful world building, these, and there's also a chimpanzee, I nearly forgot. There's also a chimpanzee doctor on board who's been, again, uplifted to sentience. And it's just really, really, really strong scientific concept. So during all of this, we have the dolphins regressing, fighting themselves. They made this huge discovery. All these aliens are out to get them, and the captain has to deal with mutiny and some personal health problems himself. And it's just layer after layer after layer of intrigue. So look, there's really a lot to like about Startide Rising. If you follow the channel long enough, you would have heard me talking about our ranking on the shed ladder, and I always talk about, science fiction elements. So how strong are they? When it comes to our board Sci-fi, I've got to say, this concept in the uplift, it is so strong. It is absolutely so strong that I've never forgotten the concept. It's such a brilliant concept. I like the fact that there's this mysterious race of progenitors who have gone out there and seeded life, and the life that has evolved into sentience has then brought on a race of their own, like the dolphins or like the chimpanzees, and there's other bird-like races that have done the same. There's a multitude of galactic empires in this book. So really, really interesting concept. I thought it was just brilliant. I've not been able to see, like, go to the zoo and see a chimpanzee or see a dolphin and not think, hey, maybe one day these things will be flying starships. Who knows, right? So I just thought the concept of the uplift process was wonderful, and one of the reasons that I would still very highly recommend this book, but we'll talk about that in a little bit more. The other thing that I really found interesting was that cadaver, that dead body that they found, and really interesting, and I really wanted to understand how that hooked into the progenitor. So that really nice sense of mystery there that will keep you baited there just to stick around and see what goes on. I also really like the concept of the library. So, the concept of having this galactic library full of all the knowledge that's been acquired by all the races throughout eternity almost, right? We're talking hundreds of thousands of years that some of these alien races have been around. So I love the idea and the concept of this galactic library of knowledge, not unlike a little pea in the ocean when it comes to the internet, right? But that kind of concept, but on a galactic scale that is, spanned hundreds of thousands of years. I thought that concept was absolutely wonderful. So the other thing I really enjoyed was the language that the dolphin spoke. So they could speak in 3 different languages. One was primal, the other was trinary, and Anglic as well. And Anglic is not exactly English. It's sort of an evolution of English, but when we read the novel, whenever they're speaking Anglic, it comes across to us as English. But the primal and the trinary are almost written in haiku poem format. So it's very poetic. Every time the dolphins speak primal or trinary, it's poetry, and the book is absolutely full of it. I don't have to flick far to see if I can find one. Here we go. Just to give you an example, and this is literally throughout the book. Looks like this is, who is speaking? Akiki, I think it is. Anyway, Aki. In the depths, with itching blowmouth, I tread in wait, and Judy's calling. And it's like that, and it's really interesting, but it's, it's throughout the novel, but I really found that interesting that, you are reading poetry when you're reading half of this novel when the dolphins actually speak. So that was very entertaining for me as well. I did enjoy those sections. So some of the things that I didn't enjoy then in the book. Look, the book is 461 pages, right? But sometimes I felt that the plot was just not progressing, and it felt like it was padded out. it didn't need to be that long. I honestly think that this book could have been just under 300 pages and it would have been absolutely wonderful. Also, some of the writing, I'm not quite sure if David Brin is one of my favorite writers, to be completely frank. I just think that if this novel was in the hands of someone like, Frank Herbert or Peter Hamilton or, Alistair Reynolds, any one of these people who can make these wonderful space operas and wonderful stories, would have absolutely killed a concept like, the uplift process. But I don't know, David Brin's writing, it just lacks that little something for me that makes this a really, really, really good book, but it just doesn't make it a great book. And I think for me, just some of that padding that he puts in there that I think, I don't know, the plot doesn't seem to be progressing at all, that I think just took a little bit away from my enjoyment of the novel. The other thing that was a bit strange, and this time round, mind you, I sort of didn't find it too bad, but I remember the first time I read this novel 20 odd years ago, thinking, dolphins, really? Like, I just couldn't see dolphins, without fingers or hands. I don't know, chimpanzees, yeah. Mate, even a meerkat I could understand, right? But a dolphin, I can understand the level of intelligence that dolphins have, but I just could not physically see them in a spaceship. This time around, I knew exactly what I was getting. That's why this novel, the theme is so strong that I've never forgotten those, starship, faster than light traveling dolphins, right? So this time around, it didn't have quite the effect that it did the first time around. But I don't know, there's something about dolphins flying starships that just didn't do it for me. I think I would have preferred, even though it's probably been done and cliche, but I probably would have preferred the chimpanzees being in Streaker and having to deal with all those challenges, and maybe have one or two dolphin crews there that were trying to get uplifted. I don't know, for me that would have been more realistic at least, but it wouldn't have been the novel that it is, having said that, right? The other thing that was a bit strange for me is that every chapter in a novel goes to a different point of view. So you're talking, it switches between the different dolphin crews and the different main characters in the crew. So every chapter will go to a different person to get their point of view, through to the galactics and different aliens there. So it's constantly floating around every chapter. And there's something like 115 chapters, in 125 chapters at least. I think that's all it is. 125 chapters. So they're very small chapters and they're constantly flicking around, especially towards the end of the book. You're literally, reading a couple of paragraphs, then it's someone else's viewpoint, a couple of paragraphs and someone else's viewpoint. I don't know, it was a bit distracting for me. It's a personal thing, but it was a little bit distracting for me. So that would be something that I would say wasn't quite 100%. I didn't feel it needed to be like that. I'm not quite sure how else he could have done it, given the novel that is written. But I thought at times it was just not the right pacing for me. The other thing that, these have been minor criticisms, right? And personal opinions. But the thing that I really didn't like in here, man, I don't know, David Brin must have something with dolphins that just, I don't care to understand what's going on in this dolphin's brain, and his sexual appetite, and how he would love to bite this female dolphin on the pectoral fin and go through all these sexual fantasies in his head. I don't know, and it came up a couple of times, and I thought, really, man, like, I don't really care to know what a dolphin cares to do with in his sexual times. It's a bit strange like that. And it even happened a couple of times with the human crew, and I thought, I don't know, it was a bit juvenile, I guess, for me, and I just didn't really understand why it had to be there. Sure, yeah, I understand that, dolphins are probably, apart from humans and apes, the only sort of creatures that have sexual intercourse for pleasure, as opposed to just mating. But, do we really need to understand it to the level that he's done it in the book? I don't know. It was a bit strange for me. I just didn't care for it at all. So having said all of that, still a wonderful novel. I still really did enjoy it. A Triple Crown winner. It's not easy to do, right? So there is something to say about this novel. But when it comes to recommendations, look, I would highly recommend it purely on the theme, right? That concept of the uplift and uplifting species, I think, is a really, really strong one. Like I said, it's probably one of the strongest concepts when it comes to what we've covered so far on the science fiction, sci-fi shed ladder that we've got going on here. So for the theme alone, I think it's just worthwhile reading. If you can get around dolphins, as as comedic as it sounds, like having a dolphin flying a spaceship, if you can get around that element, look, it is an absolutely fine book. It's a really, really good read. So I read this book, like I said, first time, it would have been at least 20 years ago, came out in 83. It must have been 90. So what's that? Nearly 30 years ago, potentially, I read this novel. So it's been a while, right? It's been quite a long time, but I've never forgotten those flying dolphins, right? And not even so much the dolphins as much as the concept of uplift, right? That concept was just wonderful. So look, yeah, I think it really strong book, highly recommended. The others that also want a Hugo and a Nebula, I think both, I'll have to double check, but it's the Uplift War. That will be coming up in a forthcoming review. So a little bit thicker, that one. What is it? 600 odd pages, 635 pages. So that will come up sometime in the future, which is the sequel to this particular novel. So if you like this one, I suspect you'll like that. From memory, I think I enjoyed the Uplift War a little bit more than I did Startide Rising, but let's see what happens when it comes to the shed ladder. So yeah, look, highly recommended, very fun book. I'm going to set up our shed ladder and we'll do our normal ranking. So let's do it. So back to the sci-fi shed ladder and ranking tonight's 1983 Hugo and Nebula award-winning novel in Startide Rising by David Brin. And we have a very, very difficult decision to make tonight. Because one of the inputs, the criteria that I put these novels to is how strong is the science fiction theme. And I've got to say that Startide Rising by David Brin, when it comes to concept, it's probably number one. I absolutely love that concept of the uplift process, right? But what it has against it is that it doesn't, for me, have much else. I did enjoy the idea of those progenitors and the mystery around them, but it doesn't really go into a whole lot of detail in this novel here. Now, the characters themselves, I didn't speak about it when I talked to the things that I disliked, but one of the things that make it really difficult, because it is one of the criteria I use on the board when I rank these novels, is how strong are the characters and are they well developed? And I've got to say that these dolphins, for me, they were all of the same cut. I really couldn't tell dolphins apart. Like, they all talked the same, they all acted the same, except for one or two of the edge cases that made sort of the plot line flow, right? Like Takata Jim, if you've read it. But apart from one or two, the rest of them all sort of acted and talked the same, and I really couldn't tell them apart. And the same could be said about the Earth crew, the Earthlings on the crew as well. They were genetically modified humans, some of them, but they were all of the same cut as well. They didn't really bring any of the personal, personality into the plot. At least I struggled with it. So I'd have to say that very, very, very strong concept. I didn't really care much for the characters, nor did I really care so much for the plot line. And like I said, I think the plot and the narrative just didn't quite flow at times. I felt it a bit bloated and it wasn't quite as fast-paced as I thought it could have been. So it's going to be on the A side or the B side. I'm going to have to probably say it's going to be towards the bottom of the A side. And again, I say that because, oh man, can I even say that? Because Flowers for Algernon is still up there and it's still cursing me. Maybe one day I'm going to have to move it across so I don't feel so conflicted. Because I've got to say Flowers was definitely better. I enjoyed it more than Startide Rising. So we've got to keep true to that, right? This is about how much did I enjoy it. So even though the concept is strong, I'm going to renege and I'm going to say it's not going to make it on the A side. Where the A side, when I look at the A side, most of the novels on the A side have got really, really, really strong themes, right? But they've got some really good character developments, as is the case to Your Scattered Bodies Go. Absolutely love the characters, as was the case for this Immortal. Great character development. Really clever concepts in Ringworld, obviously. The Demolished Man, I thought, were just beautiful written novel all through. So no, it's not going to make it because I didn't enjoy it. I thought it was a bit bloated than it perhaps should have been. And I didn't enjoy it more than Flowers for Algernon. I did enjoy Rite of Passage more than I did Startide Rising. So it's going to be, again, like we're sort of following a pattern here. It's going to be between Rite of Passage and Babel 17. And I'm going to say I enjoyed Rite of Passage more than I did Startide Rising. But I did enjoy Startide Rising more than I did Babel 17. And it's rather interesting, this one too, because Babel was also a very strong concept. But I've got to say that Startide Rising, that uplift process is for me stronger than Startide Rising. What it lacks in character definition and just generally good writing, I think makes up in a concept. But Rite of Passage, I really did enjoy the writing, and it's a good feel-good book. So yeah, I think that's where I'm going to sit. Startide Rising. Yeah, I think I'm okay with that. Yeah, it's not too bad. So look, that's where it's going to sit there. Like always, these are all wonderful novels. I know that there are some people that will probably think Startide Rising deserved a place on the A side, and that's probably true too. And maybe in another year or two, if I was to do these again, I may feel differently. But that's where it's going to sit tonight. Very wonderful book, awesome concept. These are all wonderful books. I say that almost every single time we do this board, but they're all wonderful books, and that's where we're sitting tonight. Hey, it's been an interesting week, interesting novel. Really enjoyed reading through that, and I hope you join me next time in the shed.